Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just letting everyone into the room today. We'll get started in just one more minute. Okay, well, we'll get started. We only have an hour together today, and so I just want to jump right in so that we have enough time to cover this material. I am Jenny Dopp, and I am with the Utah Parent Center, and I'm the development director as well as our legislative representative, and also I work with Transition University and home and community-based services with waivers. So if you're signed up for our class tomorrow at our Lunch and Learn, I'll be teaching that as well. But today's class is all about advocacy and not only what we can do in our lives to be a better advocate for the ones we love, but also how to teach advocacy to our loved ones and how they can become their own self-advocates. I'm going to move at a pretty fast pace today, and so if you just want to make sure you're muted and then put any questions that you have in the chat, that will be really helpful. I have my coworker Sarah online with us, and she will be answering questions in the chat and then also adding links to all of the videos that we don't have time to watch because we only have an hour and all of the resources that we have for you. So let's get started. And I also wanted to tell you that this class was taught more in depth just this past 2 weeks ago, I believe. And the recording is still available. So if you want to see all of this information and all of the videos and have it in a classroom type environment so that you can see the video of Sarah teaching this information, email the Utah Parent Center and they can send you the link to that video. But this is my son, Jackson, and I thought it would be really good for you to have a visual so that you can put a name with a face when I mention him and also think about your loved one. So if you're the self-advocate with the disability, you're obviously thinking about yourself, your friends, people in the community that you associate with. And then also, if you are a caregiver for a loved one, think about them. We're all at different ages and stages. We all have different abilities. And so if maybe you're not at the same place that I am with Jackson, maybe you will, this will kind of spark some ideas about what you can do as you continue along on your journey. So Jackson and I have been working on this for several years. He's now 23 years old. He works at McDonald's. During the summer, he works at Lagoon. I don't know if he's going to do it this year. He might be over it, but for sure he loves his job at McDonald's. And boy, does he have that routine down. When I come through the line for my Diet Coke, he does not break script and routine. Like this is a perfect fit for him. And I'm so happy that he's found his place in the world. But as he continues to move forward with his journey, it's important that he knows these tools, even though he already has a job and he's completed post-high and he's out of high school, he still needs to learn these tools because he needs to advocate for himself at his job, in our church community, in our neighborhood. Not everybody understands his disability, and so it's important for him to have these tools. So think about that. This is, again, my role as a caregiver. What can I do to help propel Jackson forward and advocate for him? But then also I need to understand where we've been with the disability rights movement so that I know what's in place and I understand how we got there so that I can continue to move the work forward, because believe me, we are not done. There's more for us to do. And then we will also cover at the end our legislative session that's currently going on and some of the bills that might be important to you at this time. Okay, so I want to give a little shout out to our Transition University books. If you do not have a teenager yet or somebody who's transitioning to adulthood, you might not be familiar with these books. However, they're really important. All of our information is color coded, and all of the information I talk about today is within the purple section of these books. So if you need a refresher, you can flip to these books. They're available as PDFs online on our site. Sarah's also going to add them to the chat. And they'll be a great refresher for you. There's links in the books, there's worksheets that you can use with your loved one, and they're just really helpful. So The youth transition book is geared towards youth, the language in it, the information, the pictures, and then the choices booklet is really for parents and caregivers and professionals. Okay, so let's get started. We need to start with the beginning in mind. So that again, so we can understand where we've been. So as of 2021, the Census Bureau data for Americans with disabilities, it's a group of approximately 42.5 million people. But I wanted to break that down and figure out how many people have a disability or special health care need in Utah. So I took the information from the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services. And as of July, we're estimating that there's over 860,000 individuals in Utah who are impacted by disabilities or special health care needs. Now, that is a really hard number to try and define because you have to figure out, okay, are we including the blind population or the vision impaired population? What age group is this including? So I tried to include all age groups in that number, and then we would have to drill down with each of those institutes, the Ken Gardner Institute and also DHHS, to figure out which pieces they're including as well. And so this is a really good estimate from all of my data mining, that there's about 860,000 of us that are impacted by disabilities and special health care needs. So that's a lot of people. This is not just, a few here and there. When I go out and do advocacy groups in the community or outreach, I say to the group, how many of you are impacted by a disability, whether it's a child or, a cousin or something like that, and only a few hands go up. But then when I start talking about, okay, how many of you are impacted by autism or diabetes or a hearing loss or a learning disability or dyslexia or ADHD or depression or anxiety, almost every hand in the room goes up, right? So these numbers are growing as people start to identify more with the resources that are out there. And we as caregivers and friends of the disability community and advocates can really help to propel this movement forward. So the disability movement started kind of in 1891, when we really started to see these ugly laws show up in Chicago City Code. And this code outlawed the appearance in public schools, in public, of people who were, in the words of the law, these ugly laws, or diseased, maimed, mutilated, all of these words that we no longer use. And I know it's just like obscene, like you can't even fathom this, but this is where it started. People would give birth to an individual with a disability, and their only option was institutional care. So that's kind of where it started. And so as we have moved forward, these practices and laws have changed, but we still have so much work to do. So and Sarah, go ahead and add any of the links for these because we won't have time to watch them. But another example is the Willowbrook School. So in 1948, the Willowbrook State School opened as the largest institution in the world for the treatment of people with developmental disabilities. And they were separating them from the mainstream of society. It was located in the Willowbrook neighborhood on Staten Island in New York, and it was open from 1948 until 1987, which again is unbelievable. And the conditions inside the institution were deplorable. And so to get an idea of how far we have come, we have to look at the past and we have to recognize where we've been. And the video that Sarah will add to the chat is disturbing. So if you are going to watch this with a self-advocate or somebody that you want to educate about where we've come as a society, I would recommend you viewing the video first. It contains images, language, nudity, but it is real and it is what had happened. And so we want people to understand about this so that they can realize that, these are things that have changed, but we still have a lot of work to do. We won't watch this, but again, it's very powerful, and I would recommend that you look at it. Because the parents and employees of this institution came forward and worked with a journalist named Geraldo Rivera. Is it Rivera? Rivero, I need to say that right. They exposed many of the things that were happening there, and that is what helped to propel, along with the work of some other historical disability champions, that's what helped to propel the work forward. So as one former employee stated in the documentary, Willowbrook affected the entire world. It was ground zero in disability rights. And so the political reaction to this led to the enactment of even more legislation, such as something called the Protection and Advocacy System, or P&A system, in the developmental disabilities world, and the Bill of Rights Act. And the Education for All, they called it handicapped children back then. We no longer use that word. And the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act. The Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act that was initiated in 1975 to protect individuals with developmental disabilities living in large institutions from abuse and neglect, and the SRPRAs, it's the acronym for the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act. Those protections affected persons with disabilities who were confined in jails, prisons, juvenile detention facilities, and other institutions for those who are mentally ill or who have developmental disability. And they were the first federal civil rights laws that protected people with disabilities, eventually leading to the enactment of the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I'll just interject right there that we have to look at this because so much of our prison population are individuals with disabilities who either didn't understand the law, didn't understand what was happening, the way that they interacted with police, or maybe the way that they didn't have services in their life that impacted their choices, which brought them to an institutionalized setting in the justice system. And we have to really look at the demographic of our prison population and realize some of these issues are still impacting people, and we need to make sure everyone has the access and right to this care.
This was a really
Okay, so let's look back and start at the beginning. So following the Willowbrook expose, many of these laws were put into effect. So we have the ADA, that was the American with Disabilities Act, and it provided a clear and comprehensive national mandate for this elimination of discrimination against people with disabilities. And then we also had the Family and Medical Leave Act, which entitles eligible employees of covered employers to take unpaid job protected leave for a specified family and medical reasons with continuation of group health insurance and coverage under the same terms and conditions as the employee that didn't have the leave. We also have HIPAA, which is our privacy rule that provides those federal protections for personal health and information. We have the Rehabilitation Act, and there's several parts to that. And again, we don't have time to go into all of this detail, but if you look at all of these different acts that put into place, it ended up impacting, Section 504, which protects persons from discrimination based upon their disability status. Section 508, that was amended in 1988, is a federal law that requires agencies to provide individuals with disabilities equal access to electronic information and data. And it just keeps going. Olmstead was huge. Olmstead is what paved the way for us to care for our loved ones in our homes. There were two powerful women that were institutionalized because of their mental health issues. And after they were treated, they were still being kept in the institution. And so they sued and were able to have this ruling, the Olmstead decision, where services are appropriate for the person does not they're not restrained to the institution. They can receive services in the community and they can be accommodated. And again, I'm just giving you just highlights here, brief snippets, because we don't have time to go into a lot of depth. But I just want you exposed to all of these decisions so that you can understand the language and see how this are the abilities and the rights and the benefits that we have now are all built upon the backs of what has come before us. We have the No Child Left Behind Act, which redefined education and the federal role in the K through 12 public education, with an emphasis on closing that achievement gap. We have the Education of All Handicapped Children Act in 1973, which then morphed into what we have today with the IDEA legislation, so Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. And also the purposes of that and how our children who have IEPs and my own kids who have 504s, all of this legislation helped to benefit them. We also have the Career and Technical Education Act of 2006, and it helped to develop more fully the academic and career and technical skills of secondary education students and post-secondary education. So what's next? Are we done? Is everything, best case scenario, or is there still more to do? So let's talk about that. With self-advocacy, it's something that is more prominent. So there was Willowbrook. There was also a group of powerful self-advocates in the 70s. If you've ever watched the movie Crip Camp, it was kind of the beginning, the genesis of all of this advocacy work that has been done. And so it's been years in the making. And these early years and their work as self-advocates really paved the way for the world we have today. And just as a reminder, if we need to define this, a self-advocate is someone who has lived experience with a disability. Self-advocacy is where a person speaks for themselves and communicates their own needs, wants, and desires. And it's really important that as a caregiver, we allow that communication to take place. For so many years, I've been Mama Bear with Jackson, and I've just, done all the things, and I've made it work, and I just keep paving the way for him. But he's a 23-year-old adult man, and I need to make sure as a caregiver that I'm giving him the tools to help him be successful, because what's going to happen when I'm no longer here? How successful will Jackson be if I've always done all of the work for him? And so I need to give him the tools in the format that works best for him and within his capability, but I can't be short-sighted about it. So I want to talk a little bit about the self-advocacy piece and remind caregivers of some of these tools, because we're in this world every day. A lot of days we're just white knuckling it, trying to get through the day. And so all of these things are not at the forefront of our minds. So just as a review, these are some tools that we can use. We need to remember that all individuals have the right to choose who support them. They get to pick where they live and who they live with. They get to determine how they spend their time, and that they have the opportunity for employment. They have the opportunity to choose how, Jackson spends his money. Right now, it goes into a bank account and he gets to spend it on his meal after he works and Slurpees and Maverick and all of the things, but he's also planning to buy a Tesla. So we have this, this balance of what he wants in his life, and it's great for him to have these goals. And I need to give him the tools to help him advocate for himself and to reach his goals. So as families, we work with many different agencies that support our youth and our loved ones, and we should be asking ourselves, are these goals that are set for them, whether it's in school as a second grader or a transition IEP in 11th grade of his junior year, or whether it's the goals that we set for him as a family as a 23-year-old and that he sets for himself, frankly. What's the outcome here? And we need to ensure that federal regulations are met, and that we are advocates within our systems to help moving this work forward. You'll notice the color change on this slide. Those Transition University books that I mentioned at the beginning of the session, this is the entire green section of those books. It's all about community living, person-centered planning, helping Jackson decide what his life looks like and letting him determine that. So in the broadest definition of self-advocacy, it's that ability to speak up for themselves. And so I wanted to give you some tools of organizations or resources that can kind of help you do that. And so the first one is the Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered organization. They have some really great tools, and Sarah's going to add all of these to the chat. The National Center for Independent Living. Of course, the Utah Parent Center, we just have tons of information, just a plethora, a whole library of resources for families. The Division of Services for People with Disability really focuses on person-centered planning, but that's not just something that works with DSPD. We can use those tools that we have in the green section of our materials to really help parents drill down and figure out what might be the best supports for their loved ones, and also for self-advocates to have these tools. I can give Jackson that youth work booklet, and I could go through it page by page with him, or I can also give it to him and he can work at it at a self pace that works for him, something that speaks to him, what piques his interest, and kind of do that exploratory method as well. There's also little ways to advocate. You can ask questions like, are you hungry? Are you comfortable? Do you like your clothes? I take Jackson shopping and he gets to pick out what he wants. He has a very different idea of what he wants to wear than what I think he should wear. He just loves to wear Star Wars shirts every single day, which is great. And so I can offer him alternatives, but I also need to let him make those choices. So there's simple things like that, but it's also giving them the starting point of learning to make their own choices, and that parents don't just get to choose every single thing for them. And it teaches them to start to be an advocate for themselves. You and your family have this important experience that are valuable, and people need to hear your story. So people need to understand what life is like for Jackson and our family because they have no point of reference. If you haven't lived with somebody with autism, you might not understand the nuances. And in your brain, it might just be this stereotype of what a person with autism might act or be like, or what their feelings might be. But as we share our experience, it helps others to understand, and it brings this legislation that's being talked about with our legislature to the forefront and actually puts a name and a face to it, so that when I talk about the DSPD waiting list or the Medicaid waivers, they're thinking about Jackson when they hear it on KSL. It's not just something that's in the ether. It really puts a name and a face to it. And also, when Jackson tells his story, then people are able to understand his world better and understand what life is like for him. So being brave, sharing your story, advocating for yourself. So how do we get from hiding behind what's going on in our house? And not that we hide, but it's just all of these things our family knows and all of the things that we live with every day. And how do we get brave and start sharing that? And so we have to understand who we are as individuals and what our lives are like and how we can share that information with others. We can share what we're good at. We can share what we struggle with. We can share what our disabilities are, and we can explain them to others. People might not understand what a learning disability looks like. Well, why can't you take the test? Why do you have such stress about going to school? Why is trying to catch the bus by yourself causing you so much anxiety? They just don't have a point of reference for that. And so as a mom and a dad and as a caregiver, grandparents, these natural supports that are in people's lives, we can start to share that information. I remember sharing something with my sisters once, and they said, "Oh, don't worry, our kids do that too." Sorry, I'm joking. Um, and I just had to say, "I'm sorry, but you don't understand. Your kids do not do this as well." It was just something where they had no point of reference for the conversation, and so I had to be brave. I also had to regulate my nervous system so I didn't lose it, as a parent when you're just trying to communicate that, and share with them so that they could understand. Friends and siblings, that's some of the hardest parts for Jackson, is that he doesn't have a lot of friends. So his siblings are his friends. And it's even me educating his siblings. Okay, Jackson doesn't have a driver's license. He really wants to go to Maverick to get a drink, who can take him? And helping the siblings understand Jackson's point of view rather than it's something they have to do as a caregiver. Because being a caregiver and a sibling is really hard as well. And we need to also understand our children's or the caregivers as a sibling, their perspective and what life is like for them. What about a therapist or a counselor? Are we connecting our youth to individuals that have the experience to work with our youth? Do they have that point of reference? What about our medical teams? Are we connected with the right people? Vocational rehabilitation, DSPD, all of these support services that are out there, are we connected with them? Do we even know what's available? Are we on the wait list? And we might think, gosh, there's no point because I'm never going to get off. Jackson's been on the wait list for 10 years. I just updated his profile with our coordinator, and he's up to 2,000 on the waiting list. And I believe there's about 5,000 on the waiting list. So he keeps going up and up. And so as a mom, one side of my brain might say, gosh, he's never going to get off. But the other side of my brain, because I work in this world, knows that I can qualify for one-time funding if by being on the list. If I'm not on the list, I'll never qualify for that funding. And by being on the list, I'm telling our legislature of the huge need that is there for families to get funded and why this funding is important. And so it's really helping this community come together by showing the need, by being on the list, by being an advocate for him, by updating that profile every year and being part of the system so I can be part of the change. This is a new booklet that the Utah Parent Center has just put out, and this helps everyone understand what DSPD is. If you're like me and you've been on the wait list, you have no idea because you've never been allowed to play in the pool. But this booklet really goes through and shows families when you come off the list, what the process is, how you work with a support coordinator, how you work with providers, how you find awesome providers, what are the red flags that you should look for. It really walks you through step by step payment systems, fiscal agents, all of these terms that sound really confusing and overwhelming. And it breaks it down so that when you get the call, you'll be ready and you can know what to look for and you can refer back to it. And if it's still confusing, reach out to us. We would love to walk your hand and or hold your hand and walk you through this information. Okay, so let's jump ahead. Helping Jackson understand who he is, what he's good at, identifying the areas in his life that where he can be a success. This is one of the pages from the purple section of that youth work booklet that we talked about at the beginning. And this really will help your loved one, you know, look at the highlights in their life because so many times Jackson gets frustrated. Part of his disability, he's on the autism spectrum and he also has a chromosome duplication. And that chromosome duplication impacts the way he processes information. So he can understand what you're saying, but his articulation is really impaired. And so it's hard for him to formulate a thought and get it out to me. And so I have had to learn to wait for the answer. And he puts a lot of pressure on himself to give me the answer. But if he's able to go through this work booklet and identify all these areas where he's awesome, not only does that build his self-esteem, but we can work off of this and say, oh my gosh, you're really great here. Maybe we can find a job for you that relates to this area of that you have a strength in your life. It also helps him to understand that other people have these challenges too. His challenge might be the way he regulates his emotion or the way he articulates language, but he has all of these other areas where he has strengths. In the booklet, we also talk about something called disclosure. Sometimes as parents, we really want to keep that information to ourselves so that that information isn't shared with others, that Jackson might be looked at differently. But the minute I disclosed and Jackson disclosed his disability to the general manager at McDonald's, a whole new area was opened up for him because he wasn't just looked at as somebody who couldn't do the job. It helped them understand how Jackson could do the job with these accommodations. And now they realize he's one of their best employees. He's on the autism spectrum. He's never late. He knows his schedule. He does his job exactly as he's told. So it's his superpower. Autism has now his superpower rather than the disability, and it's made him a valued member of the team at McDonald's. So in the booklet, we go through and we talk about when would you want to disclose? When would it might not be a good idea to disclose? What are all these reasons and how does it actually play in real life scenarios? Another page in the booklet talks about that self-awareness, getting to know yourself, what kind of accommodations could you ask for? And this is something that you could work with your vocational rehabilitation counselor as well, and getting some of this training and real life scenarios and how would this work for you? If you have a youth that's still in school, talk about it with your IEP team. Help to have these conversations. How can we create empowerment for Jackson in his class? Something that I did when he was going through school was I would go in at the beginning of the year with my little PowerPoint, this was back in the day, and we would talk about how we're all the same and how we're all different and how Jackson's the same as you, but in these areas, he's a little bit different. And what this did is it created a warrior system around Jackson of these individuals in his classes that understood Jackson and worked with him throughout all of his years of elementary and junior high school. And then half of those kids followed him to high school. And it was amazing because they understood Jackson. They understood that he was going to have a meltdown if this thing didn't happen. And I kind of pointed out all these different triggers for him so that instead of a bullying situation, it could be more of a support situation. Now, is this going to be perfect all of the time? No. Life is super hard. People are super uninformed and hard things are going to happen to our kids. But what I tried to do as a mom is try to be as open and transparent as possible with Jackson's permission, of course, and he was part of the presentations. We shared the information that he was comfortable with, and for us, that worked. For your situations, it might be something totally different. So you need to figure out that balance. How can you provide disclosure, accommodations, empowerment, self-advocacy? It's going to look different for everyone. And if you have questions about that, reach out to us because we're happy to help. There's another tool in that green section that deals with person-centered support planning and person-centered planning, that self-determination piece. What do I want my life to look like? This community mapping, who's at the center of Jackson's world? What's the issue that he's facing? Who can help him? Who are the people? Can Diane, the neighbor, pick him up at McDonald's if I'm not able to? What are the tools that we have available? So you would start by putting Jackson's name in the center for each of these issues that you're facing, and then work around the box and figure out who are the support systems. We don't have DSPD yet, so I don't have that as a support, but what tools do I have in place? What tools can I use to help Jackson? I want to move on to the advocacy section. Again, I know that was really fast, but this advocacy section is all about our role as caregivers. So whether you're a professional in the disability world, you're a parent, a grandparent, maybe you're a sibling, like my 26-year-old daughter, she works with the Utah Parent Center and does our sibling project. So she's trying to bring all of that information to families as well, because we cannot forget about our siblings and try to keep those relationships intact as well. But advocacy impacts everyone. What can we do so that people don't feel like they're alone? Families, teachers, medical teams, friends, neighbors, government officials. We talked about some of that in the community mapping slide, but it's important to know who those people are so that you can bring them on to part of your team so that nobody's feeling alone in this. I think when we were a young family, Jackson was just diagnosed with developmental delay. The human genome hadn't even been mapped yet, so we hadn't found his chromosome duplication. I didn't feel like I fit in with support groups like for Down syndrome or for, the Epilepsy Foundation. I just didn't feel like I had a place. And I just really felt alone in my struggle. My family members didn't really get it. Only my spouse and our kids got it. And of course, some of the medical community. But even because when he was finally diagnosed at 8, the geneticist at Primary Children's handed me one sheet of paper and said, "This is all we have on this. Good luck." And I was so thrilled to get the one sheet of paper because we had been alone for all of this. And so we really need to look at our communities and make sure people are feeling seen and supported. We have the Family to Family Network with the Utah Parent Center. It's a volunteer network that's available in all the different areas of the state. We have Halloween parties, we have Easter egg hunts, but not only do we have fun potlucks, we have information that's brought to the families. We tell them about the resources in their area and show them and walk with them through the hard. But we also walk with self-advocates because, like I said, Jackson has felt the hard part of his disability where he cannot communicate with other people. And it's really frustrating to him. And so that validation piece and helping people feel seen is so important. And it's part of advocacy work because as a mom, 23 years in, I can help that mom who's has a newly diagnosed child. You're not alone. This is what we do. This is the list you need to get on so that she's not having a 12-year-old and she's never heard of DSPD before. So we need to open our mouths. We need to be brave. We need to share the information. And parents and families know their child the best. And so as they grow, we can continue to give them as much information as possible so that they can continue to make the decisions for their life. But it's this balance, right? I got to give Jackson this information, but I also need to let go. So it's this really tricky balance of something that's called duty of care. And it's this moral, legal obligation to make sure Jackson's safe, right? He would hold my arm as an 18-year-old crossing the Smith's parking lot because he was afraid of the cars. But yet he did not want me near him at the Starbucks counter ordering his little pink fruity drink because he wanted to do it himself. So there's a balance, this balance of keeping him safe, but also letting him fly when he wants to fly and allowing our support teams that dignity of risk. If Jackson's safe in this controlled group, like I'll give you an example, right? This is just that I'm pulling out of the air. It's not a real life example, but let's say Jackson was with his group of his caregiver, his provider, right? He's with DSPD, and it was determined that it was safe for Jackson to go next door from the facility where he was having his day program to get a drink at lunch from 7-Eleven. Letting me as a mom, letting him have that dignity of risk to walk next door and allowing him to have that experience, right? I make mistakes every day. I'm a professional woman. I have these kids. I have degrees. I have all of these things that I've accomplished, and I still make mistakes every day, right? Well, letting Jackson have the ability to make a mistake, that's the dignity of risk and doing it within a safe capacity. And it's this tricky balance for parents, especially if you're the guardian, you're the legal guardian. It's just this mindset, this shift that I have to change and allow my child to still have autonomy, to still make choices in their life. And it's a really tricky thing. I could teach a whole class just on that. But that's a little snippet for you to kind of ponder and think about because it's tricky. And I've had some hard conversations with parents as they start to learn things like the settings rule, guardianship, alternatives to guardianship. And we're going to get into some of that just a little bit later. So how do we teach our children to advocate for themselves? This is a process. It doesn't happen overnight, but what we need to do at first is to model good advocacy, and our children will learn from us. My children are learning about the legislature because I'm actively involved in looking at the bills that are being presented this week. Okay, how did the House vote? How did the Senate vote? Where are we having some trouble? How do I reach out to the legislatures, to Senator Adams and Representative Barlow for my area? What does that look like? Taking the lead on things, getting out into the community and showing your kids what's available, going to the homeless shelter or the shelters that, dropping off blankets, showing them the challenges that are in the community and what we can do as citizens to help advocate and to make life better, not just for us, but for other people around us. Again, aside from the green section, a lot of times our youth might not have the skills yet, or maybe it won't be possible for them to have some of these opportunities to communicate. And so we just wanted to make sure that you were aware of the Utah Center for Assistive Technology, that they can do assessments and that they can make recommendations for assistive technology so that if an individual in your life might have a hard time with vocalizing their needs, they still possibly have use of their eyes and they can point with their eyes and make choices that way. They can advocate for themselves. We just have an example of Sam. Sam's mom used to work for the Utah Parent Center. She's recently retired. But Sam developed this affinity for horses around age 3. And because of that, his family immersed him in all the things that were horses, and including the coverage of the Kentucky Derby. And it was a 2-day coverage of the event, and Sam was content and excited to watch it all day. And it became this annual event for his entire family. And at about age 10, his family asked him who he thought would win. And at that time, he was making choices by raising his right hand. And so his family presented him with the name and the picture of the horses and had him make his race selections. And he successfully picked the winner. But his family was creative and they figured out what worked for Sam in that situation. So then you take that to an IEP meeting and you translate that. What skill does Sam have to communicate? Is Sam just going to be, a victim of his IEP, or does he really get to be involved? Does he get to lead the discussion in his IEP? Are we as caregivers teaching our parents teaching our youth, to have a voice in their IEP? Or because this isn't our first rodeo and it's our 12th IEP, are we just going through the motions? So we need to rethink some of that and be really mindful and thoughtful as we move forward with our kids in some of these decision-making opportunities. So this is Jackson when he was in the beginning ages of high school, and my older daughter, Lexi, who's now that 26-year-old caregiver giving input and insight into our Parent Center curriculum. And so as these youth have learned to advocate, we as caregivers are really trying to listen carefully, try to understand other people, validate feelings. Lexi has very different feelings about the disability community than I do because she's viewed it as a sibling. And so what insight is she able to provide to not only Jackson, but to like his programming as he moves forward in life and I become less involved if she were to become one of his caretakers? What questions do we need to ask? Are we sharing information, or are we trying to protect our other family members? If I was hit by a bus tomorrow, do my family members have a resource guide of medications, of physicians, of therapists? Are we preparing Jackson's circle for the information they need to be an advocate for him? Tools for advocacy. Jackson could make a card that described his disability and hand it to someone so that he could communicate his need, but it's hard for him to articulate it verbally. So are we using tools? When he used to go into his IEP meeting, could he make a picture about himself? There's a new speech therapist every year. There's new school psychologists every year. What are we doing so that they understand who Jackson is and that Jackson's not just the name on the top of the IEP form? We really want them to understand who Jackson is. So is there something else that we can do to communicate those needs to people? And advocacy can take place anywhere. Examples are home, school, community, work, with your doctor's office and hospitals. Am I letting Jackson talk to the doctors, or is the doctor just talking to me? If the doctor asks me a question, do I direct that? Jackson, what do you think about that? And letting Jackson have the opportunity to have that discussion with the physician. It's not just about me and how I want to control Jackson's world. It's about giving him the tools to grow. You have to think about it as like a garden. You're planting the seed in 8th grade that you might not see bloom till he's 25. But what can we do now to help these seeds of advocacy grow so that he can be more engaged? So on Thursday, there's the LCPD reception down at the Capitol, and it's the Legislative Committee for People with Disabilities. So I'm taking Jackson with me to the reception so that he can have an experience at the Capitol in the rotunda, meeting other people who love the disability community as much as we do. And I'm looking for opportunities to engage Jackson. There's different boards you can get your youth on. Intermountain Healthcare has a youth advisory board. The Utah Parent Center has a youth advisory board. There's a lot of disability organizations that are looking for the voices of self-advocates. The UDDC, the Utah Developmental Disabilities Council, that's next door to the Utah Parent Center, they have a speakers network. They want to have self-advocates share their voice, share their experience, and to help be involved in these important movements like advocacy and movements up at the Capitol and hearing and interacting with legislators. Okay, again, IEP meetings, we've talked a little bit about this. We have a whole section being taught next month in February with Transition University that will teach you all of the details about advocating during a transition meeting, being prepared, bringing individuals with you to the meeting that might be a valuable voice to contribute to the conversation, letting your youth lead the meeting, understanding the importance of things like post-high, graduation options, counting your credits so you don't actually graduate accidentally. You might think, wow, that's a thing, and it can be a thing if you are not understanding how graduation credits are tracked. So come next month and we'll go into a deep dive on the IEP section. Voting, we have a new voting video that we've put together. Jackson is very political. It's one of his superpowers with autism. He could tell you anything that's happening in New Hampshire right now. He could tell you all about the candidates. It's just something that he's really latched onto. It's also important to understand what's happening legislatively. There's always a lot of discussion around voting by mail and how that could impact the disability community if voting were restricted. Some people don't understand how voting impacts rural areas or individuals with disabilities, and so they don't think it's a big deal. And yes, everybody can go down to their elementary school and vote. And so we have to be loud and we have to be respectful as we discuss these things, but we have to bring it to people's attention that voting legislation impacts the disability community. Advocating with the doctor, we have a whole section in the transition books about preparing to transition to adult healthcare. What happens when Jackson turns 18 and the geneticist that he's seen his whole life, or the neurologist that he's seen his whole life, he's no longer able to visit with primary children's. How do we set up, his adult appointments? Does Jackson have something that's called a healthcare notebook? This is with the Utah Medical Home Portal. I can help Jackson learn how to keep track of his labs. I can help him learn how to refill a prescription, that he calls this number at Smith's and he puts in this prescription number. And when it runs out, we need to call and make an appointment with, Dr. Cook, and we can, help him understand the whole process so that he can start to grasp, all of the pieces of his medical care. He's had umpteen million MRIs in his life, and so he totally gets that. But does he understand how to get the results after the test? It's all of these pieces that we have to put together, and that's going to look different for everyone. But this guidebook that we've put together for you with the care notebook can really help you and guide you. Okay, let's move on to all of the stuff that's happening right now, the legislative piece, and how are we going to move this work forward? So the legislation impacts all areas of our lives. So whether it's housing, in schools, public transportation. Right now I sit on a transportation committee with the state, with the UTA and the UDDC, and we're trying to figure out how we can make transportation better for individuals. For instance, Jackson can ride the UTA. We have a stop right outside of our house. We live kind of by Highway 89. So it's this great corridor, right, of transportation. And he can catch the UTA and ride that anywhere north or south. But it is literally impossible for him to go east and west in a way that would not be totally overwhelming and full of anxiety for him. So he can't get to his job, even though his job is a mile away. So he's dependent upon us for transportation. And so we're doing this work within the state to try to expand this one area that is literally life-changing for Jackson. He could have access to our entire community if we could figure out this piece. And so that's just one area, but it's important for us to look at, okay, what is stressing my family right now? What legislation is currently in place? What work needs to be done? What work can the Utah Parent Center do to help you? What can you do to get involved with the UDDC to move this information forward and get it in front of the people that really are the decision makers in the state? So you might just be feeling like, okay, I'm just a mom, I'm just a grandma, I'm just a dad. No, you're not. You have a voice, you have lived experience. You know what it would take to move this work forward for your loved one. So get involved with us, join us, and let's do the work together. This is a video that Sarah will put in the chat that's really impactful. It shows you um, kind of what it's taken to get to this point. And again, we don't have time to watch it, but I recommend you going back and watching this with your family. The settings rule is something new. This applies to you if you've been involved with DSPD and your child or your loved one is on a waiver. And it's basically, in a nutshell, there's all of these 12 areas. I believe that there's 12. You'll have to correct me, Matt or Audrey, if I'm like not thinking of that right in this very second. But there's all of these areas that say, okay, Jackson now finally has waiver services, and the services that are provided to him need to allow him access to the community. So let's say he lived in a group home. Jackson's allowed to have a lock on his door. He's allowed to have food in his room. He's allowed to have the roommate he wants. You know, of course, there's availability issues, and so we have to work within a system, but we also have to make sure that Jackson's not being in a different form of institutionalized care. He should be able to leave when he wants to leave. He can work where he wants to work. We need to provide access to the community and do it in a way where we are obeying the law. I might have guardianship of Jackson, but even as a guardian, I still need to allow him access to the community and choices. And it's that balance, right, of dignity of risk and giving Jackson choices. And the people that support Jackson need to follow the laws. So again, that red and blue booklet that I showed earlier, this will walk you through the entire settings rule, help you understand it so that it's not confusing. And I'll even walk you through it one-on-one if you want me to. Okay, so what's next? We have all these great laws in place, but what's happening in the state? So the Utah legislative session started this month, and it's an opportunity for you to communicate with your legislators about bills that are important to you. The Utah Parent Center just sent out our annual report yesterday, and some awesome moms already emailed me back and said, okay, what about this bathroom bill that's going on? How is that going to impact my son when I have to take him into the bathroom to change his diaper? And he's their adult son. So I was able to go through the law with them and show what's proposed and how that could impact them. Right now, we don't think it will impact those with disabilities, but what an awesome mom to think, okay, this bill's coming forward. How is it going to impact my family? What work do I need to do on it? Do I need to reach out to my legislators about this bill? There's again, the voting bill. There's a bill that's coming forward about increasing the amount of people coming off the DSPD waiting list. So I'll show you all of those bill numbers in just a minute, but get involved, know what's happening. There's 3 bills that the Utah Parent Center are really watching. The supported decision-making legislation, so that not only will we have guardianship as an option for our kids, but supported decision-making would actually be a legal opportunity or a legal alternative, excuse me, instead of just guardianship. There's also that funding that I talked about for dedicated funding for the DSPD waitlist and trying to bring, I believe it's 100 more people off the list this year. And then there's other bills too that we're kind of keeping an eye on. So if you go to the Disability Law Center's website and you click on their legislative link that's on their homepage, scroll down and you'll see a bill tracker link. And that bill tracker has all of the bills that impact the disability community. They'll show you the status. They'll show you kind of what's happening, what's a summary, because I've done that. I've read through the bills and you're just like, okay, I'm not sure I really understand what this means. The Disability Law Center will summarize it for you and really help you. This is important to know how to contact your legislator. So Sarah will add these to the chat, but all you have to do is enter your address and it will tell you exactly who is your legislator. It will give me Representative Barlow and Senator Adams' contact information. I wanted to share my voice on some issues earlier this week. And so I texted them and I just texted them my opinion and what I wanted them to do as their constituent. They represent me in the House and the Senate. And I really wanted their support on these issues. And sometimes I get a response back and other times I don't. There's a lot of legislation right now with different representatives that are supporting the work of the disability population. Find out who those people are. Look and see who's on the Health and Human Services Committee, who is appropriating this money. Find out who they are, share your experience so that when they're in committee, they're going to be thinking of you and the situation that you shared with them about the safety of your child, the well-being of your child, the support that your child needs. They aren't going to know unless they hear from us. Okay, so these are things that we can do. We can make an appointment to meet in person. It probably isn't going to happen during the session, but we have an entire year. I could meet with Senator Barlow in April and try to connect with him and share that information, or I could meet with some of his staffers. Find out what their schedule is, where they're going to be. Maybe they're going to be coming out of committee. Maybe you can send a note to the floor during the session. Maybe you can send them an email or a phone or leave them a phone message. If they're on social media, that's a great way to connect with them so that you can share their information as well. Learn about the issues in government that impact you. What do you want fixed? What situations could be better? If you're a grandparent and you see that your son raising his child with a disability is really facing this issue, maybe your son doesn't have time to do all of this, but maybe as a grandparent, you can really be his eyes and ears and really help move that forward. If you want to get involved, contact the DLC, the Disability Law Center, or the Utah Parent Center, or any of these other disability organizations, and we can link you with information as well if you don't feel like you know who to talk to or who to call. What to do in your visit if you get a chance to meet with somebody. Be early, don't be late. They have a tight schedule. They might literally only have 30 seconds to talk to you. So have your talking points outlined. Dress well. You want to go in and represent our community, that we're professional, that we know what we're talking about, that our opinion matters. There's a card system at the Capitol, so we can give you more information about that. Again, this whole training, you can get the video of this training from the Utah Parent Center, but be quick, introduce yourself, let them know that you're their constituent, offer a solution. That's the hardest thing, is when they know there's a problem. They know there's 5,000 people sitting on that wait list, but what is a creative solution? What could we do as a state to establish funding to fund that wait list? What are we going to cut instead? They don't want to hear that you want to cut education. What is your idea to get funding for the DSPD waitlist and try to move the work forward? Okay, so we have a scenario that we walk through with parents, and so I can send that to you if you kind of want to practice, if you have a little bit of anxiety about talking to your senator or your representative, and I can show you how that's done. So reach out to us after if you want me to send that to you. But just to summarize, the disability rights and its history are important to learn. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody and they said, well, we're just not really interested in all of that. It's too much to learn. And it's two sides of the same coin, right? Yes, it's a lot of information to learn what IDEA is or how the ADA impacts our community. But if you don't understand all of that, how can you fully advocate for what you need changed? You have to understand how things dovetail together so that you can use the language that the legislators are restricted by, the current laws, and figure out which piece in that law needs to be changed, which piece is broken. How can we move the work forward with this new area? And then self-advocacy means speaking up. It's it's that uncomfortable situation. My husband's a professional in the tech industry, and there was somebody in a meeting that said, "Oh, that person has a touch of the tism." And he was just floored. It was almost like somebody using the R word again. So he had to think about, okay, he spoke up, but how are you going to be prepared when somebody speaks about our community, our loved ones, Jackson, in a way that's derogatory because they do not understand the disability? So be prepared with some of those talking points in your life. Help to educate ways, help to educate people in ways that don't disparage them or distance themselves, that they do not want to listen to you anymore. But how can you open that conversation? One thing that I usually do is, oh, I heard you say this. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about how you feel about that. Tell me more about why you don't think Medicaid funding is important. I would love to know your thoughts on that. And so it kind of gives you this entry point for discussion. But advocacy really works. It does change your life. It's hard. It's hard to keep getting told no, we can't fund the wait list. It's hard to watch your kids suffer. But if we don't keep saying something, how are we ever going to create change? And how are we going to affect change for our loved ones? So just a little shout out to Transition University. Again, next month in February is that Transition IEP class, where we will talk more about advocacy. March is going to be huge. We're going to talk all about guardianship and alternatives to guardianship and how you can use this as a protection for your youth, but also give them that empowerment, that self-determination, person-centered planning. All of these things are coming up. So look at our events calendar, just utahparentcenter.org, and then click on the events tab. And we would love to help you. So we only have like 4 minutes. I'm so sorry. These lunch and learns are really quick. But we would love if you have any questions that haven't been answered in the chat. Sarah, maybe you can help me. Is there anything that I've missed, or Matt is on here? Matt's really involved with the legislative session. Aubrey, anyone else that wants to speak up?
I don't have any specific questions. There is a personal question, Jenny, that I will need to talk to you about offline. But other than that, I think we've been able to keep up with all the questions and answers and a whole bunch of links.
Good. And Matt, I'll just open it up to you. Is there anything more that you would share, or anything this group should really be aware of with this legislative session and advocacy?
I'm just here to learn from you, Jenny. So
Okay.
yeah, actually I don't have I think you've covered just about everything. I mean, there's a lot going on. It changes day to day, but the more you can get involved and raise your voice, the more likely it is we're gonna get the services we need for our kids.
Yeah, I agree. And really, that Disability Law Center link, it will give you all the information you want to know and more. And the Utah Parent Center will try to push out any other information if we feel like we need testimony from parents at a committee meeting, or if, there's like last year with caregiver compensation, we really rallied together as a community to push that initiative forward. And so we'll always make sure that we're getting the word out to you when there's a need.
Yeah. I can't
Oh,
remember.
go ahead.
One thing that I would bring up, and I can't remember if you mentioned this or not, this year in the legislative session, they're only doing testimony on Fridays. And this morning, they heard the waitlist proposal to fund the waitlist. And so this Friday, there would be a chance for folks to speak to the waitlist. To do that, you would have to sign up, you have to call, you can't sign up online. But again, if you're interested, if the waitlist is something you're passionate about, then a couple days would be the day to make your voice heard.
Thank you. That's a great reminder. And also, there was a question: as a parent attending tomorrow at the Capitol, what can I expect? What should I bring? As far as I'm aware, this is just a reception. I think there will be light food. If you want to attend, please register on the LCPD's website so that they can be prepared for the amount of people coming. But we hope that legislators will pop in and attend and meet with people, but you'll have representatives there from Matt's organization, from the DLC, from the UDDC, from the UPC. All the people will all be there. And so bring your loved one. It's just if anything, it's a great opportunity for them to be introduced to the process and for you to start to learn to share your voice more. Okay. Unless there's any last minute questions. Just a little shout out tonight. We're talking about that education advocacy piece tonight at the session. The Utah Parent Center is teaching that as well. And we'll cover a lot of what goes into being an advocate when it comes to education and having that voice representing your child. Make sure you're, watching those credits. You're not just at the mercy of your IEP team. You are part of that IEP team. You are part of the solution. And your loved one. They need to be at the center of it. And then again, tomorrow at the Lunch and Learn, we'll talk about Medicaid waivers and community access, advocating for yourself within that system of support and understanding the settings rule so that you can be a better advocate with providers and support coordinators and just advocacy in general. It's really important and we can't talk enough about it. When doing the preparation for this workshop, I looked back at the work done in the 70s after Willowbrook and just that entire group that laid the foundation. And it's just so grateful as a mom. Like, where would we be today if they hadn't have done the work? And so in 20 or 30 years, they'll look back at what you're doing today. Look at all the work you did. Look at everything that we've accomplished together, but we have to work together to do it, to have that louder voice. So thank you for coming today. I appreciate you giving up some of your time to be with me during lunch. We'll send out the recording to everyone who's registered and we'll have it on I believe we'll put it on Matt's website as well. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Jenny. And thanks to the interpreter. We
Yes,
appreciate
thank you. I'm a fast talker, so thanks for keeping up with me. Thank you.